Hey everybody, it's Jim from Cigars. Today we're doing a deep dive into E.P Carrillo Cigars. And although the company has only been around since about 2010 or so, the history really goes back a lot farther than that. And it goes back to the guy we know as E.P Carrillo is really Ernesto Perez Carrillo Jr. And his father, Sr., was a cigar maker in Cuba, and his mother actually worked out in the cigar fields. So the family has a very strong cigar lineage. Ernesto Sr. actually had a cigar business in Cuba called El Credito, and he made cigars and sold them out on the street. Interestingly enough, Ernesto Sr. was also a senator in Cuba. And this is pre-revolution, and that's an important part of the story, because of course the Cuban Revolution rolled around, the family had to flee to Miami. Ernesto Sr. thought, well, this is going to blow over. This little dictator is not going to last very long, and I'll be going back to Cuba soon. So he didn't do much in terms of the cigar business for 2 or 3 years. But once he realized that they were pretty much in Miami permanently, he restarted El Credito and had a little bit of a good cigar operation going there. However, E.P. Carrillo Jr., Ernesto Jr., had really not much interest in the cigar business. His true interest was jazz. He was a jazz drummer, and he went to New York City when he was 25 in about 1975 or so, and tried to catch on in the jazz scene there. And 2 things happened to bring him back to Miami pretty quickly. One was his father's health took a turn for the worse. He was still doing okay, but he was getting older. And secondly, Ernesto tried to catch on with Stan Getz and some other jazz bands, and it really didn't work out for him. So he came back to Miami and started to embrace the cigar business and spent 4 years, the last 4 years of his father's life, learning the cigar business from his father. So that brings us now up to 1980. His father passes away, and Ernesto Jr. now owns the El Credito Cigar Company. And he kind of struggled for a long time. The 80s were not a great decade for cigars in general, and there was a lot of Cuban immigrants that were in the cigar business and a lot of competition and whatnot. So it was a little bit of a struggle. But in 1990, Ernesto Jr. came out with La Gloria Cubana, and it took off like gangbusters. The 90s were the start of a real strong decade in cigar smoking, and that combined with a really good cigar, which the La Gloria Cubana was, made it extremely popular. It received a number of awards and was just doing great. But by 1999, Ernesto Jr. decided he wanted to move on, and he sold the La Gloria Cubana brand to General Cigars, and that's who is doing it today. But along with selling the cigar brand, he also ended up working for General Cigar for 10 years. So that takes us up now to about 2009. So he struck out on his own and started EPC Cigar Company, which is E.P. Carrillo Cigars we know today. He spent a couple of years getting his feet under him in that new business, but then in 2014, the big breakthrough came when they came out with La Historia. La Historia was a very, very popular cigar at that time in 2014 and garnered the #2 cigar of the year by that One Cigar magazine. Building on that, 4 years later, he came out with the Encore, which was the #1 rated cigar that year. And 2 years after that, he came out with the Pledge, which was the #1 rated cigar. There certainly are other E.P. Carrillo cigars worth mentioning, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But I did want to mention, too, that they are based now out of Miami and Santiago, Dominican Republic, and have a very nice facility in Santiago. They're a little bit different than some of the companies we've talked about if you've seen my other videos on deep dives. A lot of companies like AJ Fernandez and Fuentes and Plasencia sort of embrace what is known as vertical integration, where they own the farms and they own everything about that cigar from beginning to end. E.P. Carrillo doesn't do that. They source their tobacco from other places, and that gives them more flexibility in terms of the tobaccos they use. But they take the tobacco in its raw state, and they do all the fermenting and the aging and so forth, and bring the tobacco to the point where it is rolled in their Santiago facility as well. So they do all of those operations, everything but the farming. Lisette is his daughter, who is involved in the marketing side of the business, and his son, Ernesto III, is involved very heavily in the operations side. Let's talk next about E.P. Carrillo's lines of cigars. We're certainly familiar with the main ones, the Pledge and the Encore, La Historia and the Allegiance. But there are some other ones as well. E.P. Carrillo was actually kind of a founding father of the big cigar ring movement. And they did that by coming out with the cigar that's known as the Inch. And the Inch is called that because an inch is 64 gauge, and their cigars have 4 vitolas in the Inch line, going from 60 on up to 70 gauge. There's 3 different blends for the Inch. The Natural was the first one introduced, and then they came out with the Nicaraguan, and then finally with the Maduro. And the Inch is pretty popular. It hasn't gotten tremendously high ratings, but I've had a few of them. I think they're a pretty good cigar. So if you weren't aware of those before and you're a big ring gauge fan, those are something to consider. Another set of cigars that's overlooked is the Essence line. And the Essence line has a Sumatra and a Maduro version. And E.P. Carrillo's Connecticut entry is called New Wave Connecticut. And according to the company's information, what makes it different from most Connecticut's, it's a little bit more on the spicy side. And that brings us to what I would consider their big 4 cigars. Again, La Historia, Encore, Pledge, and Allegiance. And one thing about those is they all have similar bands. So I'm showing a couple bands here, and they all have a very similar design but different colors. And on one side is Ernesto's mother working in the tobacco field, a little picture. And on the other side is Lisette, his daughter, in modern day Miami. If you're unfamiliar with the 4 cigars that we just mentioned, La Historia is a Mexican wrapper, very dark, very rich, with Nicaraguan fillers, and it's a medium full to full-bodied cigar. The Encore, I think, is the kind of lightest tasting of those 4 cigars. It's kind of citrusy in a way, but it certainly packs a little bit of a punch. It's a medium full cigar as well. Pledge is, again, the 2020 #1 cigar of the year, and that has a USA broadleaf Maduro wrapper on it. That's probably the strongest cigar of the 4. The Allegiance is the latest entry of those 4 cigars, and it's more of a medium-bodied cigar and a lighter taste. It's a Sumatra wrapper. There are 2 other ones that are kind of sidelights to that line that I should mention because questions come up about them. The Pledge of Allegiance came out, I believe, in 2023, and it was a limited run cigar, and it honestly wasn't reviewed that great. I shopped around a little bit and looked around on websites trying to find it for sale, and I wasn't able to find any. Same thing goes for the Pledge Black. The Pledge Black was a very limited edition cigar. I think they've only made like 20,000 of them. And those came out earlier this year, 2024, and I was not able to find any of them in stock anywhere. That is a quick run through the E.P. Carrillo line. I hope you enjoy these deep dives. I certainly enjoy finding out about these companies, and I will see you next time from Cigars, Cigars, Cigars.